This is Alexi Boyd at Small Biz Matters at the Cosboa Conference, speaking to Stephen Irons, who's the Assistant Minister for Vocational Education, Training and Apprenticeships at the federal level. Thank you so much for joining Small Biz Matters this evening.
Alexi, great to be here with you, and I know this has been a long day for you, so
it has.
But keep on keeping on.
I do enjoy speaking to federal ministers, though, because you guys really have a finger on the pulse, and you're the ones who are making the decisions that are impacting on small businesses at a real granular level. Do you think that's why it's so important to be at these sort of summits and be seen and be connected to small business? Is that part of what you're trying to achieve by being here this evening?
Well, actually, by nature, I'm a hands-on person, so I had an experience as an apprentice and running a business for 22 years, 25 years.
May I ask what that business was?
It was an air conditioning business as a wholesaler, importer, supplier to the construction industry, and also a service and maintenance side of the business as well, which dealt with retail, industrial, commercial type refrigeration as well.
Fantastic.
So 16 staff, and we employed 4 apprentices during that period of time. So it was, and that's on an ongoing basis. So we turned over a lot more apprentices and that. So hands-on guy, like to be at things, and the only way we can find out to make the right decisions in policy and government legislation is to interact with people who are at the coalface.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being here. Now, let's talk about the 2019 budget. Frydenberg unveiled a $525 million vocational education package to target skills shortage. Now, that's a big issue for small business, and it keeps coming up with regards to, people not being able to find the right skill level of what it is that they want. What is it that, how is this being delivered on the ground? How are you getting this money rolled out into the various sectors?
Well, it'll be rolled out in various ways in the sectors, and I know the vet sector are a little bit apprehensive because there wasn't a lot of detail in the Joyce Review, and myself and the Minister and the Department are currently working up a framework for that, what will be the improvements to the vet sector. We see it as improvements anyway, which come from the recommendations of the Joyce Review. One of the things that I've noticed, and from my experience in business and also in politics, that education training, the education training sector has been, since I was an apprentice, probably captured a bit by the academics and educators, and the influence of industry and business is not as great as it should be. And I think that any changes that we make must be industry-led or industry-based, and because they are the people who actually employ the people who are trained. Now, if we train people who aren't suitable to be employed, no one's going to employ them, so we can throw as much money as we like at it. And that's why I think my focus has been to be getting out to all stakeholders as possible. I've met with numerous industry associations, and the feedback I'm getting from them is that they're keen to get on board, but they just want to know that they're going to have some input into the curriculums and the changes that are going to be made to the actual education system. So I think we're going at 100 miles an hour. We're very keen to get it right, and we're not going to rush to failure. I think we need to make sure that anything we propose has feedback from industry, and the industry have some genuine input into it.
I really like the idea that you're getting the consultation process at the beginning of the process, so you can really plug in all that information, because I guess as small business owners we have a lot to give in terms of our experience and our knowledge of what we expect the end product to be in terms of the curriculum. Is that what you're trying to get out of the small business owners, to give back into the curriculum and the information?
Yes, it's vital that we train people, because every environment you go to is different, and the responsibility of not only the educators but also the businesses, you have to have the people who can fit your skills. And I know as an employer myself, our environment and the areas we worked in were different to ABC Refrigeration down the road. They worked in a different environment, so they needed different skill sets from their refrigeration mechanics. The basic skill sets were there, but to actually decide whether you're going to be pulling refrigeration cabinets out of supermarkets, or whether you're going to be installing cascade systems in multi-layered refrigeration systems, it's a different environment. But they need the same basic skill sets, but it's just a different application of those skill sets. So to be at the coalface, I think, is important, that, and Scott saw it, or the Prime Minister saw it important, that someone with my experience is at the forefront of implementing the Joyce Review. So he recognised that I have those skill sets to not only go out and understand what businesses are looking for, but have the empathy to understand that we can't do these changes without their input.
It's great that you're interacting with the business community in that way. Let's talk about the students at the other end of that. One of the things that many students, when I speak to, who are looking at doing entrepreneurial roles or are being encouraged to start their own small businesses, they feel that there's a bit of a shortfall with regards to business acumen and learning how to set up a business. Is that something that the Joyce Review found? Did they speak to students, or are they? Was it more just about with the end result of what the apprenticeship gives you?
Well, I think it was more about the end result and the process, and what we're trying to develop is an end-to-end. Now, as far as starting a business, and we know there's too high a failure rate of businesses in Australia, and usually because they're undercapitalised or they don't have the right entrepreneurial skills to develop the business and deal with, the red tape that's involved with setting up the bureaucracy and all the compliance costs that go with setting up a business. As someone who did that many years ago, but was lucky enough to have a mentor who gave me some really good advice during my time of establishing the business, I think that's something that we should look at, and people who are starting business should be aware of the fact that they need to have someone or something teach them advice on how to run their business. Now, when I went through high school, we had business education classes. I don't know if they still exist.
No, they don't. I mean, you can do business studies, you can do legal studies, but it's not a part of the core curriculum as such.
No, this was part of the core curriculum at the time when I went to school. So going into business, everyone thinks that going into business you just turn up and you rock up. It's not. It's one of the best pieces of advice, and I played football in the Waffle in Western Australia, and my mentor said to me, how do you make decisions when you're playing football and what your tactics are going to be? He said, well, you look at the scoreboard to know whether you're in front or behind. And he said, well, that's what you need in business as well. So the first lesson he gave me was treat your P&L, your monthly P&L and your cash flows and your balance sheet as your scoreboard, and make your decisions on what you're going to do from that. Now, unless you have that discipline in your business, and you should have it now because you've got to do a monthly a quarterly BAS, and to do that you've got to keep everything up to date. So they're the sorts of advice that a mentor can give you, and they can also talk to you about expenditure, cash flow, whether it's worth investing in something. And but basically I think the government should get out of the way of business. Our compliance costs for business are too high in Australia, and I think that's something that the PM's aware of, I'm aware of, and it's something that will also be part of the total holistic approach the government takes to small business, and not only tax cuts but compliance costs as well.
You mentioned P&L. I don't know how many people coming out of a tertiary education or university or even out of apprenticeships would really know what that is. Is there a possibility that that could be addressed in terms of the curriculum for these future entrepreneurs and future small business owners?
Well, if businesses are saying that they need, we're making changes to the VEC, and businesses are saying we need people to have some entrepreneurial business skills as well in their training. Now, I never needed any of the refrigeration mechanics to have a business skill to go and do what they did. But if they were ever going on to run their own businesses, they would need to upskill and have some courses available. So I think there should be options for that type of training, because it's a skill that you think might be easy, but it's not. As I can tell you, someone who ran a business for so long, and you're always got to be on top of it. If you don't get on top of it, you lose the control of your business, and you can generally lose your business unless you stay on top of it.
So it's really about further study and making sure that you've got those skills through more education, and hopefully being able to find the right education out there to upskill into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, or find the right mentor. Now, I've been approached by businesses in the past to give them advice because they know I've run a business for such a long time. I've been willing and happy to do it, and there are plenty of retired businessmen, I'm sure, who are in the same boat. So you've got to just go and find out and seek someone, because normally your parents can't advise you because they might not have those skills. So for anyone who's potentially looking to start a business, there are business advice centres around, but I find that a lot of the time, even those business advice centres have people working in them who haven't actually run a business.
Well, I think given that we're at Cosbo, it's probably a good idea that they seek out a professional association that can probably assist them with those things as well.
Or the professional association have a list of mentors they can give them and say, here's someone in your area, retired, willing to help you, let's go from there.
Let's talk about TAFE and tertiary institutions such as that, where there's no longer an ROI scheme. Is there any plans to perhaps maybe redirect those funds into those tertiary institutions, or are we just saying that TAFE is the bastion of state governments?
Well, at the moment it is the bastion of state governments, and whether the changes or the improvements we make to the vet sector include enhancing and encompassing funding, or part of it is we haven't made that decision yet, so that'll be part of the total approach, and I'm sure from the feedback we get from all the stakeholders who we talk to, we'll find a solution that works for everyone.
Have you got any plans to do any investment into vocational training in the Indigenous sector? This actually came from a small business colleague of mine who is in that sector and feels as though that's lacking. Have you got any plans? What would you say to that person asking that question?
I've had discussions with Ken Wyatt, and he's got some ideas, and I've got some ideas. His electorate's next to mine, and I see Ken quite a bit, and we're quite excited about the fact that the changes we're making to the vet sector can enhance the Indigenous training sector as well, and we've worked closely with Jared Neesham. TAFE is actually in my electorate, which is a really good system. There's a great system operating in New South Wales as well through the TAFE Foundation. If we can enhance and improve that and take it to remote communities as well, Ken and I are keen to.
Because it's obviously a very important part of, Aboriginal education, and making sure that we strive to lift up those opportunities for them in any way we can. There
was a great program Woodside ran, which was an education program, 3-month education for parents, and the parents graduated after 3 months. Now Woodside, I don't know if they're still running it, but the education program was to educate parents, Indigenous parents, how important it was to send their children to school. And I think the parents who I spoke to when I went to the graduation ceremony were so excited by the fact that they'd never understood the actual idea of how important it was for their children to go to school, and they went away with a different attitude altogether. Hopefully they take that back to their communities, and we see the initiation of a value where people see the fact to go to school has values not only for their communities but also for themselves and the future of their children. And with the Indigenous migration, who I saw in the papers today, are moving towards cities, we need to get them into the education system, and everyone has different learning skills. I left school at the age of year 10 because the classroom didn't suit me. Now, if the classroom doesn't suit Indigenous people or people within the Indigenous community, when there needs to be other ways to teach them, we've got to find those ways.
And the vet sector is obviously a very big, important part of that.
It is.
So we're talking about $525 million vocational educational package. You mentioned at the beginning of the session that it's something that is not done quickly or inefficiently in that way. How long before we have a sort of a complete rollout or an understanding of where that funding is going to be spent?
Well, the Joyce Review talked about 2 years. The Prime Minister's more ambitious than that, so he's putting pressure on both myself and the Minister to get something out as quickly as possible for stakeholder review, stakeholder comment, and I'd like to see it either early next year that we can get those programs or the format out to industry for comment.
Well, that's fantastic, and I'd like to welcome you to come back on the program when it's all set in stone, and we can talk a little bit about how small business can tap into this new great resource and some of this funding to make sure that we have those benefits as well as the students who are going to be supporting our businesses.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, the outcome is we all want better qualified students who are more trained for actual employment, and that's one of the things the secondary education system doesn't do. They don't train people to be employed. And and the fact is that we recognise employers are the only ones who are going to employ these people, and they need to have an input into it.
And small business is the largest employer in Australia.
They sure are, and as someone who's my wife's still in small business, so I'm still aware of what's going on out there. She makes all the comments to me about the compliance costs and everything that are involved, but there's always a better way, and if we can develop that and make sure that the industry and the students both benefit from it. I think it's a win for everyone.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much for joining Small Biz Matters this evening at the COSBOA conference. Those of you who have just joined us, you can, of course, listen back to any podcast via our app, via iTunes, via Podbean, via Spotify, and go to smallbizmatters.com.au to find over 150 educational podcasts just like this one. Steve Irons, thank you very much for joining Small Biz Matters this evening.
Thanks, Alexi, and I hope everyone tunes into your podcast.
Thank you so much.